you'll notice that your stress response or your trauma response is the flight, where there's a ton of high anxiety because you're freaking out about, if I do not flight, if I do not run away from this, what is going to happen? Is this threat going to get bigger?
You're just reacting, feeling so out of control, so not confident in yourself, and feeling like the world is just this place that you have no certainty of because you don't know how to respond to things. Hey everybody, it's Bianca.
And this is Emilia.
Welcome to another episode of Evolve Ventures, where we are helping growth-minded humans evolve by breaking one limiting belief at a time. We hope you enjoyed the last episode, number 227, Motivation Monday, how to overcome feeling guilty when we aren't okay. For today, 228, why you should care about your trauma response. So I'm super excited for this one because I think everybody has heard of the concept of trauma responses and has heard about like fight or flight, and you know a little bit about the nervous system, and you know about all of these things. But what we really want to do is help tie that into what your actual experience is of these and how it impacts your life, and honestly why you should care. Because we're being impacted by these trauma responses in ways that we don't even realize. And when you don't know, then you can't have control over it. And I've seen this so often with my clients, and I know, Em, you have too, where because they don't know, they are so controlled by these things. And there's this sense of hopelessness and helplessness and this feeling of, I'm not in control of my life or my reactions or what I do during challenge. So what we're really going to be diving into today is, number one, what are the different trauma responses? There's not only two, like we've previously thought, fight or flight. There's actually four. So what are the trauma responses? What do they look like? What is the impact that they make? And how do we start to change them and modify them? So by the end of this episode, that is what you are going to get. So, Em, do you want to start by diving into what the four different ones are?
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I have a digital asset. One of the feedbacks that we have gotten from our listeners is that having a digital asset, something that you can look at while you listen to this episode, is super duper helpful. So I'm going to have that in the show notes linked for all of our listeners. And I want you to kind of bring that up as you follow along. So I'm just it's quadrant, okay? I have that up in front of me too. So I'm going to actually read it right off of that so that you can read along with us. So like Bianca said, there's four trauma responses. And those are the four trauma responses that are categorized for the large majority of human beings. Now, we all fall on a different spectrum on these, and it is more or less along the lines of situational, contextual dependent. So you might react in one way in certain situations with family, and maybe you might have a different trauma, or also known as stress response, in a situation at school, right? So there might be some changes, but typically what we've found and what the research shows is that for the large majority of human beings, our trauma response, also going to be referred to in this episode as stress response, is typically you tend to veer towards one, right? And that's really the go-to. So what I want to first start before we get into this is the key of this episode for all of our listeners is understanding what is your essentially go-to. And where do you find that there are moments where you find maybe it doesn't register as trauma? Because I know in my coaching and I know working with so many different clients, a lot of us have a weird relationship with the word trauma. So wherever that relationship with that one word trauma is, let's replace that with stress response. Okay. So when you have high levels of stress and when you're under a lot of stress, what is the go-to reaction that your body kind of takes over before your mind is able to interrupt it? Okay, so that's what I want us thinking. So when you're in a high stress response, do you do one or the other? 4 different ones. Like Bianca, you had said, fight, flight. There's the freeze and the fawn. So number 1, fight. All right, put your knucks up. If you're watching this on YouTube, I got my fist curled up for a reason, because what happens is when you're under high stress, your whole body moves the blood into your extremities. So from your mid torso and your thinking brain into your knucks, because you're going to put them up, there's a threat that your brain is registering. There's a threat that your brain is registering. It could be a person. It could be a bear in the woods. It could be a bull that you found after you went to, I don't know, the streets of Spain. And they did the whole Toro thing, right? Like in that moment, what the experience typically comes up, anger is an emotion that is moving through you. It could be rage. It could be confrontation or high energy. Essentially, those are the emotions that you might be feeling or might activates this fight response for you.
Or extreme fear. A lot of people, when they're just terrified, they're trying to defend themselves. Usually if they've grown up in a traumatic household or felt like they had to physically protect themselves growing up for whatever reason.
Yep, absolutely. And so this, in the fight, you're going to confront whatever the threat is. Okay. So that's fight. Is this you? Do you tend to find yourself having those moments where all of the sensations, maybe your fingers start to tingle when you get really stressed? Maybe you start to really you feel like, I've heard clients say, I just bubble up with fear, or I bubble up with rage. I'm like pissed off the fact that I'm in this corner, the fact that someone's confronting me in this arena. Like I just want to fight them.
Growing up, that was mine.
Yeah.
Ooh, I was wild growing up. So I followed a sequence growing up, and Emilia's going to talk about this 4th one afterwards, but my sequence was always fight. Like I just went in full-blown attack mode because I was scared. I was fearful. I felt like I was being attacked. So my response was always fight. So I was actually pretty violent and aggressive when I was a kid because of that. Like I felt like I was in danger, like I was going to be harmed. And so I had to protect myself. And so I was like verbally aggressive. I was physically aggressive. And then once that subsided after like 10, 20, 30 minutes, then I went into fawn. So I know that that's my cycle, and I still follow that kind of, but it doesn't look the same. It looks very different because I've been able to evolve it. So
beautiful. All right. So we'll get into the fawn, since you just had mentioned that, so that people have context to that. Okay. So fawning is the one. I remember I was like in my late teens when I came across an article on fawning, because I was doing a ton of research in this arena back in my late teens. And I was like, I don't understand why some people act the way that they do. Now I've had that many different thoughts come up, and thankfully my go-to, they don't have a trauma response or stress response here that says research, but that was mine. When I didn't understand something, I needed to figure it out. And so I would always turn to research. But I came across this article that was talking about, and this was the first time I discovered what fawning was. So this might be the first time that you've heard of it. It might be the millionth time. You might be rolling your eyes and be like, yeah, okay, we know it. But here's the thing. Like a lot of us don't realize how much we actually fawn by default. And what I mean by that is it might not be your primary stress response, but it might be your secondary to what you said be. Because after things subside, what do you do after the threat? What do you do when you realize, okay, maybe you might not be pinned down or being physically hurt, but what happens if you don't kind of fawn, which is appeasing the threat? So it could be a bully, right? Say, for example, your older brother, your older sister, your parents were kind of bullying you, or maybe someone at school was pulling you. If they weren't going to aggressively attack you and you didn't need to fight them, then what happened afterwards? If you did not appease them and kind of like go into people pleaser mode, or go into, okay, maybe I'm super codependent on them, and like I'm gonna give them no let's say boundaries. I'm not gonna have any boundaries with this person, because if I do, then that threat is going to come back, right? So if I let this bully take my lunch money, or if I let my older sibling steal my clothes or whatever, and I don't make a ruckus out of it, I don't rock the boat, is what I hear clients say a lot, then that means I'm going to be safe. So a lot of us, because we have an unconscious need for belonging that's wired within us in our human biology, we don't realize how much we are fawning by a default, whether that's our first stress response or secondary. Okay, so a lot of us, I find, really end up realizing and reflecting on this episode. It might even happen for you of like, oh, I didn't realize that that's my secondary response. Maybe that's my first and second. Okay.
Fawning usually looks like you're very quick to just do what the other person says, or you're very quick to do what you think they're going to want of you. So This happens a lot in relationships, and especially if you have an anxious attachment, you are just so quick to do whatever you think that person, what's going to make them happy.
Yeah. Or what's going to make them not yell at you, or what's going to make them not slap you or hurt you or put you back into a threat state. So this is like where you were walking on eggshells because you don't want to disrupt someone, or they might have an emotional explosion. You don't want to have them fighting or yelling at you anymore.
Right. You're completely disregarding what you're thinking, feeling, and needing to put this other person at ease. And it's meant to protect yourself, and it's also meant you're going to secondarily get your need met because the threat is going to go away. So once this person isn't yelling or screaming at you anymore, or once you feel like you're safe, then you feel okay. And there's this thought of, okay, I'm okay now, or I can get what I need now.
Yep. So we just kind of got into the fight response. We just went to the fawning response. I'll never forget when I first came across that article, B. I was like, oh my gosh, everyone does this to some extent or another. It was groundbreaking, I know, for me. So hopefully you guys can always have that in your consciousness. So let's get into the other two. So maybe you might be hearing these and being like, okay, I'm noticing certain situations where maybe I shift into fight mode. What is it? What do you feel as though you're protecting, or where do you find yourself maybe shifting into that, if at all? Same thing with the fawning. Where is it that you feel as though you're putting someone else's needs above yours just to appease or not rock the boat? Now, this third one, we a lot of us know is flight. We run away from the threat. So let's say you get a text from your partner and they say, we got to talk. Ooh, who knows that feeling? Ooh, the butterflies come up and you're like, push the phone away after you start freaking out inside. You'll notice that your stress response or your trauma response is the flight, where there's a ton of high anxiety because you're freaking out about, if I do not flight, if I do not run away from this, what is going to happen? Is this threat going to get bigger? What is it going to take away from if I do not leave? So there's tons of panic also associated with this. You'll notice that your heart really starts to beat extremely fast when it comes to this flight, because what happens, again, just like the fight stress response, your blood goes into your extremities so that you can actually get activated and move the heck out of the situation that you are in physically. So there's also a lot of high energy states that are in the flight patterns, and there's the avoidance component that comes in here.
Dissociation is also part of this too. So flight is not just physically running away, but you might also cognitively, meaning like mentally or emotionally, run away. So if you've ever had someone who you're in an argument with them and they just check out and you're like, are you even listening to me? They just entered flight mode because they're not emotionally or mentally present anymore. And for a lot of people who have experienced PTSD and who are having dissociative symptoms, this is that your mind is mentally checking out. It's black now. Like you're just you're blacked out. That's what I meant to say. You're like blacked out at that point because your brain is like, this is dangerous. We cannot physically leave, so we're going to check out.
That actually is the freeze response. So, you're talking about your mind can't leave the moment.
Your mind can't leave the moment, so it's going to emotionally and mentally run away. Yeah, freeze is when you're like, well, you're going to go into that. But
Okay. I just wanted to clarify. So your mind can't run away from you, but the way in which it does in one of those situations, like a flight, like let's say, for example, you have your parents are coming home, and let's say they are people who had way too many drinks, and you've noticed whenever they do drink, they start to get really aggressive. And maybe you, in that one moment, were supposed to be in bed, and they got home from a date night, whatever, and you went to go get some milk and cookies. And you know that they've been drinking because the way in which they open up the door and the way in which they're coming in, and you start to panic. Why? Because you hear them pull into the garage. You hear them open up the door to your home, and you hear, oh my God, they're getting closer to where I am, which is in the fridge. I'm not supposed to be up late right now. The babysitter put us to bed. I'm not supposed to be eating milk and cookies because like that's bad or whatever. So what am I going to do? I'm going to flight the situation. I'm going to run back into my bedroom. But what's happening in the moment, to what Bianca was saying, is that your mind can't necessarily run out of your body. But the way in which it does is that shutting down, which is the disassociation. And this is actually very, very common also in the next stress response, which is the freeze. So a lot of us have experienced this as well, which is when you feel and your body feels as though you can't do anything in the moment, you shut down and you block out the threat. So your body, think of it like a switch. When in the morning you wake up, your switch is on. So it toggles on. So your body gets activated, you get moving. Maybe you wake up, you go to school, or you wake up, you go to work, it gets activated, right? When you get into a stressful response, do you find yourself having that switch kind of shut down? It's like, woo, picture like you flipping off the light switch. Your body is shutting down because essentially the way in which it's learned to take care or block out the threat is to literally freeze where it is. It's kind of like shelter in place. This is where that disassociation is so big because you can't move, or because you feel as though you can't fawn or flight or fight the situation. This is the only thing that's left to do, which is freeze and shut down. Numbness starts to come in, and I find that that's a common symptom that I have seen and heard and also personally experienced in those. And it's a really low energy state. And one of the things that I found is really fascinating is when you actually study animal behavior when, like, say, for example, an antelope and a lion, when a lion is hunting an antelope, they kind of go into that when they're locked in and jaws are on the neck, and the antelope literally can't do anything physically because they can't overpower a lion. They're doing that freeze. And what's happening is studies show that they actually their brain goes into a euphoric state in that disassociation. And so they're like, I won't get too National Geographic on us, but like what happens is as humans, when we find ourselves in a situation like that and we freeze and we shut down, it's actually the disassociation becomes a really safe space because no one can hurt you there. And it's fascinating what the mind can do. However, it can be really detrimental if that's what's happening again and again in a non-threatening situation.
And this doesn't necessarily mean you're always dissociating. That's on the far end of the spectrum, but you'll see a lot of animals do this where if they're scared, they'll play dead. Yeah. They'll just wait it out. It's like, I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to not move, and hopefully they're going to not want to come near me. You know, so if you're...
We see this with bunnies on our evening walks all the time. It's like, I don't want to drive if I'm like driving home. It's like, I don't want to keep going because I don't know if you're going to randomly bolt, but they just freeze. Like deers, they just freeze, right? Like deer in a headlight. We see that all the time.
You ever been a kid and your parents are like getting into a fight, or they're just like, you can just tell it's like, oh, mom's in a mood today, and you're in bed and she opens the door and you put the covers over you and you pretend you're sleeping so that like mom doesn't come near you. That's freeze. You are like staying there and you're like, oh my God, please don't come near me. Please don't come near me. Like you're just hoping that, you know, they're going to see that you're quote unquote dead, right? That's what that is. It's like, I'm going to be as still as possible and hopefully nothing happens. It's a self-protection thing. And kind of to get a little, I really want to make sure that I say this. I have worked with a lot of trauma survivors and a lot of survivors of sexual assault. And this is a thing that is extremely common with people who have experienced sexual assault. You realize that there's nothing I can do here. And if I fight, I'm going to get hurt way worse than I would if I just stopped fighting, and it'll be over quicker. Yeah. So they'll stop. And they'll stop fighting. And it's not because you're allowing it to happen. It's because you're safer doing that than you would be if you continue to fight. And then there's a lot of shame that comes afterwards of, well, I must have wanted it. I must have let it happen because I didn't fight. So if you're listening to this and that's something that you've experienced, it is not an indicator that you weren't fighting. That was the safest thing for you to do in that moment, because your brain and your body was like, we are going to be in so much danger if we fight, if we try to escape, if we, you know, do anything that is going to make this person angrier. So your body's like, just stop moving. And when situations like that happen, that usually can lead to dissociation, because you're frozen in the moment and your mind is trying to escape from the situation. So your mind is flighting away to get you out of what's happening so you can be safe in that moment.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Kayleigh Putnam, and I'm an intern at Evolve Ventures Tech, and I work with data analytics. I just wanted to come on here and talk about my experience with the Evolve team. Every single day, I learn new skills, not only my position, but also how to become the best and most aligned version of myself. I've learned through their support that I can achieve any goal I set my mind to, and anything that I want to happen will happen if I work hard enough. I've never met a group of more supportive and genuine people than at Evolve. Every single day, members check in on other members, asking if they're okay, what they can do to help, and it's such a caring environment. And I'm so grateful I got the opportunity to work with this team, because I feel like they've truly given me what I need to be successful in my future careers, and I'm so grateful for that.
There's also, this isn't a trauma response or a stress response that you'll see on the digital asset, but it is something that I will share based on my experience, and not only personal, but also in coaching a lot of people in this arena. There's also a performance response, and not a lot of, you won't find this on articles around stress and trauma responses, where it's kind of a combination of all of these at once, where let's say, for example, and this is another example of when you're in a situation that's so uncomfortable and you're way outside of your comfort zone, or maybe you feel as though you've said no and people just keep progressing to have you do something that you really don't want to do. You recognize that freezing is not an option. You recognize that fawning is not an option. Flighting is not an option, and fighting is not an option. So you go into this fifth mode, which is bonus material for this episode, which is performing. So you perform in the way in which other people might want you to be. It's kind of, it can sound like fawning, but it's way beyond that, because it activates all of the different. It's like, oh, let me try fight. Oh, nope, that doesn't work. Oh, let me try to fight. Nope, that doesn't work. Okay, freeze. Fawn. It's a mix of all of them. So you perform to kind of be this actor or actress, to where this is not only appeasing other people's needs, but it's also you kind of fighting in the moment for yourself. It's also you find yourself disassociating a little bit, and you are in a way running away from what you want to do but aren't doing. And I find this come up a lot with women that are in the single game right now in terms of dating, when they want to just casually hook up, or if they're hooking up with other people, they don't actually want to do that, but yet all of the other stress responses aren't necessarily an option. There's a shift into a performer mood. And that's something that you genuinely like won't hear a lot of people talk about a lot. And that's something that I think that is worth bringing up, because I've actually found evidence that it's not just in those like the hookup culture, and that it actually can come into so many different areas of our life, family. It can come into our work and career. And so that performance, I also believe, is quite the stress response for a lot of people.
So we just took everybody through number 1 and number 2, right? What are those responses and what do they look like? Let's now go into the impact that they make. And then number 4, how do we start transforming that? So for anyone who's listening to this right now, you might be hearing this and thinking, okay, yeah, that's great, but this doesn't really impact me that much. Or maybe it does, but why should I care? Like, I can't change this anyways if this is just a natural thing that's in me. Think about this for a second. How many times have you been in an argument or in a conversation where you left it and the next day you're like, why the hell did I do that? Why did I say that? Why did I act that way? Why did I, react the way that I did? And I'm not in this instance talking about significantly traumatic events. This is more so on the day-to-day type of stuff. In a day-to-day type of situation, let's say, your boss came into your office and started talking to you and you're really scared of your boss, so you just froze and started fawning. And just, even though you knew you were right, and even though you knew you had all the answers, you got so scared you just didn't say anything. And then the next day you're like, why the hell did I do that? Why didn't I stick up for myself? Why didn't I push back a little bit? Or if you've ever gotten into arguments with your family or with your partner or friends, or if, you get pulled over by a cop, or if you're in a restaurant and your food isn't cooked the way you want it and you respond in a certain way. This comes out in every single aspect of our life. And what I've seen time and time again with my clients is not having an understanding of what your response pattern is, and then not having the ability yet or the desire to change it. You get stuck in these unconscious reaction patterns, living a life that you don't feel in control of, because everything outside of you has an ability to impact you and you don't have control over your response. You're just reacting, feeling so out of control, so not confident in yourself, and feeling like the world is just this place that you have no certainty of because you don't know how to respond to things. This causes more suffering than it needs to.
I agree.
Because all of us, I was in this too, so I'm not judging anyone. I struggled with this significantly.
Same.
We are causing undue suffering on ourselves by not understanding, who am I? What do I typically do? Why do I do what I do? And how do I change it? And it can be worked on. It can be understood. It can be changed. Emilia and I are living proof. Yeah. Emilia used to be extremely avoidant, and I used to be extremely anxious. And my fight and fawn system got me so hurt so many times, it's not even funny. Like, I still have, honestly, like, full transparency, I still have so much shame around the way that I used to react as a kid, because my fight system was so severe. I literally used to like fight my siblings. Yeah. Like because I was so scared, and I felt so helpless that I just like fought everybody. And I started fighting myself. I started self-harming because I had no idea how to respond, how to react, how to do something that I felt like I had no control over. And then what do I do afterwards? Let me appease you. Let me just do whatever you want. I'll completely throw myself away. I'll just give everything that I can to you, and maybe then things will be okay. Yeah. Because I'm trying to make up for what I did before.
Yeah. I was listening to a little bit of Darren Hardy this morning. Alan and he puts it on in the morning to kind of listen to, and we have our learning mornings where we kind of have that playing in the house and the leadership training. And one of the things that I thought was really powerful that he said was the time continuum and collapsing that. One of the things that I've realized over this journey of self-discovery and relearning and constantly evolving around my personal journey and in rediscovering myself and understanding and answering those questions, be that you just mentioned to our listeners, has been I can think out further into the future beyond just the day-to-day, beyond just the week-to-week, beyond just the year, right? So one of the benefits of that is being able to see what this one decision today will do for my future. And I'm realizing more and more how very few of us think that way, and that I'm not making that wrong. The reason why we very much struggle to think beyond just the day-to-day is because of what you said. We're constantly just in reaction mode. Yeah. We're not in, let's kind of choose how we want to respond to this stress. It is a guarantee that life will be changing. There will be challenges. There will be stressful times. But what we don't realize is that we can actually look at today's patterns and project that out over a span of 10 years and collapse that time and say, what is the impact to my life in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10 years from now? And to what your example was, let's say, for example, you're constantly having a stress responsive fight, and then you bring that into your relationship. You find, let's say, the love of your life. But every single time that there is conflict, because you don't have an idea of what healthy conflict can look like, your go-to every time there is a conflict, even if it's small, right? Dishes aren't in the washer or whatever, like small, it starts to build up, and your go-to response is, I'm going to fight my partner about this. Every single time there's a disagreement, it turns into a fight. Now, okay, what happens after every single fight? Now, based on your experience and your conditioning, likely you have a coping mechanism afterwards to try to figure out, how can I change a situation where I just said something that I can't change? So I'm going to cope in a way. I'm going to go maybe eat some food, right? I just did what I didn't want to do, which was yell and scream at my partner, the love of my life. And I just went and ate some food, and maybe I binged. And now I feel like crap about myself. So my inner dialogue is self-shaming. And then what do I do afterwards? Well, because I'm already knee deep in all of that shame, I'm going to continue that. And I just continue to spiral. But then 2 days from that, on the surface, I'm going to live on the surface, and I'm going to pretend everything's okay. And now we start pretending everything's okay in our relationship. We don't actually pull out everything that's swept underneath the rug. I don't actually work off those calories. And then all of a sudden the weekend comes around, and I have to really see all of the things that has added up throughout the week. And because I don't want to work on that stuff, because it's really challenging and I don't want to self-support my relationship, what do? I go out on the weekends, and then all of a sudden now I'm binge drinking because I can't handle what happened, and I don't feel like I have any control. Now do that again and again and again. 5 years from now, do you think that that relationship is going to succeed? Maybe, but on the surface. 10 years from now, what do you think your body's going to look like? What health problems do you think you're going to start to incur physically because of all of those extra calories that are being brought into your body and the poison that's being brought into your body because of the ways in which you're coping from that reactive state that maybe you might feel guilty or have shame around, right? The compound effect of our decision making, because we're constant reacting. Why, from my perspective, we should all really consider caring about what our trauma response is because that is the prediction between a long, happy, fulfilled, mobile life and one that is short, one that is hollow, one that is lonely, and one that feels unforgiving. and one that genuinely, it hurts to walk, it hurts to talk, it hurts to be who you are. That's why you should care. Because looking at those patterns gives you that opportunity to say, I can evolve this. I don't have to be this way. I can actually see a different future because I can see that there's an opportunity to change here. And that's what, Bianca, you said that we're living proof, 1,000%. I literally can go back to times where I exploded on my siblings. And it's funny now because now I get so many comments on how I'm the most emotionally regulated person anyone has ever seen. And I'm over here like, what do you mean? I feel like not at all. Like if you knew me back then,
yeah,
right? And then we keep ourselves stuck in that version of ourselves. And when we constantly don't give ourselves the room to grow, we aren't capable, or we don't make ourselves more capable than we actually are. So that's why, from my perspective, we should all really care about this. And then one step beyond that, if we can be that living proof, imagine who you can inspire that desperately needs to know that they can make a change that can have a positive impact on their day-to-day. They're 10 years from now, they're 20 years from now. You know, the positive impact be that you and I, by being living proof, have given to other people is like that ripple effect. That's huge. And so many people, you know, reach out to us on the day-to-day that we've changed their lives because we've been willing to care about what our trauma response was. And we care about doing the work to evolve it.
And the work didn't, I mean, I can't speak for Emilia, but for me, it's not like this was just some radical change that happened overnight. This took years, and I'm still learning how to do this. Like, I thankfully, I can say, like, after 8 or 9, like, I was never really physically violent again, or not towards anyone else. I transitioned it over to myself, but I have been really working on this for years because the pain was genuinely just so extraordinary that I was like, I cannot live this way anymore. I hate myself. I'm miserable. I had a lot of suicidal ideation. I felt like the most worthless, horrible human ever. Because I was like, I have no control over my life. I have no control over what I do. I feel like the world hates me. And I feel so alone. And I was like, I need to change. Something needs to change. And I finally got to a point where I realized, okay, what needs to change is me. I tried changing everyone else, didn't work. I was like, all right, let me give me a try. So
usually the thought pattern there.
You know, we'll get there eventually. So what I started doing and how I really started doing this work, and this is exactly the work that Emilia and I help our clients do, is number 1, you have to become conscious of what is your pattern. So I know for me, the first one is fight. Now, it doesn't look the way that it used to. It used to be get very aggressive. Now the fight is fight to make it work. Fight to fix it, fight to problem solve, fight to make everything okay. And it, again, ties into fawning, right? Especially in intimate relationships, I fawn like crazy. I know it. I know my pattern. I'm trying to change it. I'm working on it, but I'm a fawner. So I know that about myself. Okay, so when Emilia comes up to me and says, hey, we need to have a tough conversation, number 1, I'm fighting myself of like, what the hell did I do? What's wrong with you? And then number 2, oh my God, I don't want her to be mad at me. I don't want her to leave. I don't want something bad to happen. So let me just do whatever she wants.
Yeah. Even okay, right before this episode, I was like, B, I have something that I want to tell you. And the response was, uh-oh. It's like, no. It's actually a really good thing, right? So to your point, there's so many different layers to this. And we have to learn how to evolve, but it does. It takes inches, you know, it's a game of inches, not a game of sprints.
So number 1, get very clear on what your response is. And to the point that you made in the beginning, it doesn't always look the same with different people. In different circumstances, you're going to behave differently. So when it comes to Emilia, I'm a lot more regulated. I am so much more regulated. When it comes to my family, I'm still, again, nothing close to where I used to be, but I still get into fight mode. I notice it. So number one, what is your pattern? Number two, how often is that happening? So can you start really jotting down what are the situations and the people and the places where this is coming out? Then number three is start doing thought records. We've done not thousands, but we've talked about this thousands of times. Start identifying in that moment, what is coming up for me? I am noticing this response. I'm noticing this response in my body. My body feels like this. My mind is telling me this. My emotions are like this. What is that? Get crystal clear on what the responses are that are coming up, because that is why your response, your stress response, is the way that it is. Once you have those three components, then you can start making incremental change. Now, do not try to change your response with the biggest person that is a trigger for you, right? Like, that's not going to work. But what are little instances where this occurs, where it's not too severe, where you can try to now start making incremental change?
So important. So important. Alrighty. We hope that you enjoyed this episode. I certainly enjoyed it, but it's not about us, it's about you. So we would love your feedback. If you enjoyed this, please make sure that you share that with us. Tag us on your Instagram stories if you're listening to this and got something out of this. We would love to see it. And if you ever want to have a deeper conversation around this stuff, or maybe you're struggling to kind of figure out and you want a second opinion, Bianca and I make sure that we have a half hour on our calendars every single Saturday to go deeper into these concepts with our listeners. And we always love meeting you. So my final takeaway for this episode is going to be really thinking about the long-term impact of not caring about your trauma response, and use that example that I shared a little bit earlier of how one thought of not caring about this trauma response, how that will happen again and again and again, and what that can really add up to over the long run, and I think that it's the inversion of why you should care, and I hope that will help every single one of you consider the invitation a little bit more seriously to really care about your trauma response. It makes such a big difference. And my episode suggestion is 209 Motivation Monday, how to stop hiding who you are. For anyone that enjoyed this episode, I really do believe that you're going to really appreciate the Motivation Monday, because it really starts to get into like celebrating who the heck you are and learning what that is, and learning to re-love that, and learning to rediscover that, because it is such a process. It's a journey, and one that you never stop going on, which is the fun part. B, what is your episode suggestion and final takeaway?
Episode suggestion 140, you are not defined by your trauma. My final takeaway. I've said this a couple of times in this episode, but I will continue to reiterate it. We truly are the cause of our own suffering. We cannot control what other people do. We can't control how people react. We can't control a lot of what happens in our world. But we can control us. We can control our thoughts. We can control what we do in response to those thoughts. And we can control the choices that we make. And it really is up to each and every single one of us to start identifying these things so that we can show up as the most happy, fulfilled, present, mentally fit human beings that we possibly can. Because when every single one of us takes the responsibility of that, think of how much better our world will be. It starts at home, it starts with us, and then the people around us will start to change too. So really take episodes like this seriously. Like it's made such a difference in Emilia and I's life, and it really can make the same difference in yours. So that is my takeaway. We hope you enjoyed this episode. I know that we did, and reach out if you need anything. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.